Today we're gonna look at a hand that Jungleman, Dan Cates, played.
What you left in that?
On HCL, 200-400, where he makes a big read and a very big adjustment. Let's get into it.
1200.
1200.
So this hand gets interesting right away. The blinds are 200-400, and Jungleman raises under the gun to 1200 with ace-queen suited. So far, so standard.
I'm making it 3.
3. Thank you.
Next to act, Bobo 3-bets queen-9 suited to 3000, which is a little bit loose for the spot, but not crazy.
I'll make it 10.
10.
Maybe even like 10.
I like this 10. I like this 10.
Heads up.
You like this?
I like
Call.
Folds back around to Jungleman, and he, rather than calling, decides to 4-bet to 10,000. Again, not crazy. And if he knows that Bobo's 3-betting this light, then it becomes an even better 4-bet. But this is something you'd normally mix in at a low frequency if you were playing in solver land. They are, by the way, 600 big blinds deep to start this hand, which is going to make you want to play looser and more aggressively in position and tighter out of position. That can kind of explain Bobo's lighter 3-bets and then his subsequent call of the 4-bet as we head to the 8-8 deuce flop.
Flush draw for Jungleman. It's going to be very difficult for Bobo to figure out a way to win this one.
If it was like 100, I called it. You had like what, 150, 170, 180.
Jungleman goes ahead and bets 6,500, about third pot. And this is what you'd expect with maybe his full range in this spot. The reason that you use a small sizing here is that you're leveraging your overpair advantage and even your high card advantage, but you can't do that across multiple streets with huge bets because then you start to run into trips somewhat too often. But trips on board are not going to connect with either of their ranges very often at all because Jungleman's 4-bet under the gun. He's mostly going to have high pairs, some high cards, some bluffs like ace-5 suited, and a few, random sprinklings of 9-8 suited, maybe ace-8 suited gets in there sometimes, I don't know. But he's not going to connect with the 8 that much. Neither of them is going to have deuce-deuce. I wouldn't expect either to have 8-8, although perhaps Bobo could. He will, I think, have more of the 8-9 suited, the 8-7 suited, jack-8 suited, the queen-8 suited. As you can see here, he has queen-9 suited. Those hands tend to 3-bet and call a 4-bet, but they're not frequent 4-betting hands. So Jungleman's at a trips disadvantage here, but it's not that big a deal, because it's still such a small part of each of their range. So Jungleman bets third pot, which is very standard.
20.
$13,500 back over to Jungleman. Bobo doing this with just absolutely nothing. And he's trying to rep a big hand, but Jungleman's not going to go anywhere. Not with ace-queen of clubs.
And we see Bobo raise to 20K, which is interesting. So this is a spot where you'll see the in-position player, both in theory and in practice, do some raising with 10-10, jack-jack, 5-5, as well as some 8x and some bluffs. They're kind of protected by the trips in their range so that they can make this kind of protection value, make the hand easier to play raise with pocket pairs. I think usually they're supposed to call with pocket pairs, but they mix in some raises. And they keep it this small sizing so they're not strictly repping trips. They can have those other hands as well. Jungleman, of course, having flopped the nut flush draw, is not going anywhere. He decides to just call, which is what you're gonna have. Like, I would not have a 3-betting range on this flop unless I had a very specific read on my opponent. So I would be betting his hand and just calling it as well.
Check.
But Bobo is playing this hand like he's got no overpair. And the question is, how much money is he willing to put in the pot to get Jungleman to fold? He already raised to 20,000 on the flop. It looks like he's about to put 30 or 40 in there.
25.
And he goes 25.
So the turn is where things get really interesting to me. Jungleman checks, and Bobo turns top pair with a 9. Now he goes from bluffing the flop, which, by the way, is a really wild play. I somehow glossed over that. Do not raise the flop with queen-9 of hearts unless you have a strong read here. Just fold. But he's gotten here. Now he has top pair. It's actually the best hand. And he goes ahead and bets 25,000 into about 60,000. So he's gone from bluffing the flop to value betting, protection betting the turn, kind of representing a hand like he was representing on the flop, like a 10-10. But now he actually has it with queen-9. And this is where Jungleman decides to make a strong read. So normally, nut flush draws, like Jungleman's, make pretty good calling hands because they're beating all the bluffs. They have equity to improve. Bluffs are going to usually continue bluffing or actually make a flush on a club. So you want to keep them in. So normally, this hand would just be a check call. Jungleman decides that if Bobo had an 8, he would be betting bigger here on the turn. This is a spot where Jungleman's clearly repping mostly over pairs. And if Bobo has trips or better and wants to target over pairs, Jungleman decides that Bobo would bet bigger. He would want to start to get max value out of his trips. So Jungleman makes the read that he's up against a hand like 10-10, a hand like 9x, and he turns his hand into a bluff and goes ahead and check raises the turn.
Jungleman cutting out those 5K, those chocolate chips. And he's going to raise.
So this is, again, the kind of play that's not standard, but he's making the read, and the only way that he's going to get punished for this is if Bobo is making enough small bets with trips as well. A lot of players in this spot will not balance their sizing very well, especially when it's such a weird spot. Under the gun versus under the gun 1, 4-bet pot, 600 big blinds deep, 8-8 deuce flop, where nobody's going to have much trips, and 2 bets go in on the flop, and now 2 are going to go in on the turn. This is not a spot that you've played a lot, so you kind of have an automatic strategy that is balanced. You kind of figure it out on the fly, and what often happens, and this is really a key takeaway I want you guys to listen to, is that you look at your hand and the situation, and you just think of the right play, the play you want to make with that hand. In this case, the play that Bobo wanted to make with Queen 9 was that he wanted to get a little more value and protection and then check back the river. But what Jungleman believes, and what I believe too, is that if Bobo was sitting there with Queen 8s, he would not have played it in the same way. He would have been very likely to bet bigger. And these are the kind of reads that, are not always going to be 100% accurate, but if you can have a high degree of confidence, you can really take advantage of, because by the time Jungleman check raises this turn, he's really applying a lot of pressure. He's putting Bobo in a really tough spot because Bobo's repping that he can have trips quite often. But if Jungleman doesn't believe he actually has the trips and he has a weaker value hand than he's representing, he's going to have to fold.
And he's going to make this call.
You might as well try it.
This pot is somehow ballooned up to $180,000. One of the biggest pots of the night.
So Bobo, with a pretty good hand and very good pot odds, decides to put in the call. He's not ready to give this one up. I believe Jungleman's line looks very strong, and if I were Bobo, I'd be very nervous here, and he very well may be. But getting the odds he's getting, you could potentially hit a 9 on the river. 2 outs, going to happen 5% of the time. Or you could potentially have it go check, or you could decide to hero call river, I don't know. But I don't fault him for calling here at all, and he happens to be right. He happens to have the best hand. But this is a lot of money to put in with ace high. Some of the hands I've reviewed on this channel, the pots get this big, but they're 500, 1,000 blinds or bigger. Whereas this is a huge pot in terms of big blinds.
The river, it's a blank. Can Jungleman fire one more time?
So the river's an offsuit 3, and Jungleman has to decide if he wants to pull the trigger for the final time. The pot is just over 180,000. Bobo actually has less than that. He has 155,000 or so in his stack. So Jungleman needs to be confident of 2 things. He needs to be confident that his opponent does not have trips very often or better. And he has to be confident that when he doesn't have trips, he's going to fold a high percentage of the time, because, the calls stack up from trips and then for non-trips. If they're both if he's wrong about either of those by a decent margin, he's going to get called too often. It's going to be a minus EV bluff on the river. And he actually blocks an ace and a queen of clubs, which is pretty bad for you when bluffing this river.
Jungleman looks like he is reaching for some big ones. The green chip, like a cherry on top. Jungleman is going for it. It looks like 126.
126.
That is almost all of Bobo's chips. $306,000 in the pot, 126 to call.
Jungleman decides to bet 2/3 pot, 126K, instead of putting the full 155K in. I don't quite know why that is. I don't know if he's trying to tell the story that this is a thin bet and he's making a sick play, or if he just thinks that 126 is going to get it done as often as 155 and he's going to save $30,000. But Jungleman is making a sick play, not with the value hand that he's trying to represent, but with a bluff that is not a standard bluff at all. And that's what makes him the Jungleman.
And he lets it go. What a bluff.
Show bluff. Show bluff.
Oh, I can't bluff here.
Oh, you can.
No. Nah, Mickey can't bluff here.
Oh my God! Show us. Come on. Show us one time.
You want to see?
Okay, oh, show.
Okay, okay.
We can
Okay, maybe I bluff.
Oh.
Bobo does in the end up believing Jungleman. I mean, at this point, Bobo has like the absolute bottom of his range to get here, unless he has Jack 10 of clubs, I guess. But basically the bottom of his made hand range possible. He shouldn't really have a 9 the way this hand is played out. So it's a very standard fold given how much money has gone in theory, I would say. But he beats bluffs. And in this case, we could see Jungleman was actually bluffing. I think the key takeaway here is just how powerful it is when somebody can make a strong read. So here, Jungleman made a very confident read that he was not up against trips. He was up against 2-pair or bluff. And he went with it. And as such, got rewarded. The other key takeaway, try to be balanced, even in these weird spots. Make sure you're thinking hard about what would I do if I had the strongest hands in my range? What would I do if I had these bluffs? What am I representing? And would I actually play this way with what I'm representing? I hope you found this helpful. As always, I try to sprinkle in some strategy with these hand reviews that are beyond, basic strategy. I want you to really take something away that you can apply to your game at the tables and make you better. I hope you enjoyed watching. I'd love to hear what you think. I'd love to hear what you'd like to see more of and what you'd like to see less of. Jungleman and I have gotten to several of our own psychological battles at the table. If you want to check out some of those, we'll throw some videos up here. Until next time, this is Phil Galfond. Take care and good luck.